Hello, everyone. If you enjoy my channel, please support me with one like, one subscribe, and one share.
The ticket that changed everything. Picture this. You are standing in a sprawling parking lot in a small American town. Not the glamorous kind you see in movies, just a gray, windswept stretch of asphalt where the only thing taller than the lampposts is the feeling of being completely and utterly out of place. Your hands are cold, your coffee has gone lukewarm, and you are staring at a little yellow slip of paper tucked under your windshield wiper, like it just fell from the sky to personally ruin your Tuesday. That, my friend, is a parking ticket. But it is not just a ticket. It is a $45 gut punch that somehow manages to say everything you have been trying not to hear. You are not good enough, you are not fast enough, and you probably do not belong here. I know that sounds dramatic for a piece of paper, but if you have ever moved to a new country, tried to learn a new language, or simply felt like the universe was playing a practical joke on your life, you know exactly what I mean. That ticket was the moment my entire story pivoted, not because of the fine itself, but because of what it represented. The exhaustion of trying to survive in a world that speaks a language you are still learning to dream in. And here's the kicker. I did not pay that ticket. At least, not right away and not by myself. What happened next was so ridiculously unexpected that it forced me to rewrite everything I thought I knew about America, about kindness, and about the slow, painful, beautiful process of learning to speak again. Let me rewind a little because every good story needs a messy beginning. I was not always the person standing in that parking lot. A few years earlier, I had packed my entire life into 2 suitcases, kissed my family goodbye, and landed in the United States with a heart full of hope and a head full of English vocabulary lists that I had memorized but could not actually use. I thought I was prepared. I had watched countless American movies, listened to podcasts, even practiced conversations with myself in the mirror. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepares you for the first time a cashier asks you, "How are you doing today?" And you freeze because you know they do not really want the truth. But you also do not know if you should say good, or fine, or I am feeling terribly anxious about my green card interview. So you just smile like a deer in headlights and mutter, "Good, you?" and hope they do not ask a follow-up question. That was my life for months, a constant loop of overthinking every single syllable, terrified that I would sound like a robot or, worse, offend someone by using the wrong preposition. And somewhere in the middle of all that linguistic chaos, I fell in love, got married, had 2 beautiful kids, and built a life that looked perfect on the outside while crumbling quietly on the inside. Because the one thing nobody tells you about marrying someone from a different culture is that you are not just marrying a person, you are marrying their entire unspoken rulebook, their humor, their way of arguing, and their relationship with silence. Now, back to that parking lot. I had driven to a small shopping plaza to grab groceries because my toddler had decided that the only food worth eating was a specific brand of organic applesauce that they only sold at one store in the entire county. That is motherhood for you. Your entire schedule revolves around the whims of tiny tyrants. I parked in a spot that I thought was legal, ran in, grabbed the applesauce, some bread, and a box of cereal that was on sale, and came out to find that yellow envelope of shame grinning at me from under my wiper. My first reaction was pure, unfiltered rage. I looked around, half expecting to see a parking enforcement officer hiding behind a bush, chuckling to himself. Then came the wave of confusion. I had checked the signs. Had I missed something? I walked back to read the sign again, and there it was, in print so small it seemed deliberately designed to trap exhausted immigrants. A rule about no parking between 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. on Thursdays. It was Thursday. It was 2:15. And suddenly, my perfectly planned day unraveled like a cheap sweater. I felt that familiar knot in my stomach, the one that tells you that you have made a mistake, and not just any mistake, but the kind that proves you are fundamentally incapable of functioning in this society. I wanted to scream, but I did not have the vocabulary to scream eloquently in English, so I just stood there, gripping that ticket, while the wind whipped my hair into a frenzy, and a passing mother with a stroller gave me a pitying smile that made me want to disappear into the asphalt. But here is where the science gets interesting, and I promise I am not going to bore you with a lecture because we are friends now. And friends tell each other the real stuff. When you are standing in a stressful situation like that, your brain does something incredibly unhelpful. It floods your system with cortisol, the stress hormone, and cortisol basically puts your hippocampus, the part of your brain responsible for learning and memory, into a temporary coma. That means the more panicked you feel, the harder it becomes to remember words, form sentences, or even think clearly. So there I was, my brain screaming at me to find a solution, while simultaneously shutting down the very tools I needed to find one. It is like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. And the worst part? I knew I was not stupid. Back in my home country, I had been a competent, confident professional who gave presentations and led meetings. But in that parking lot, I was reduced to a trembling mess because I could not figure out how to appeal a parking ticket in a second language. That is the dirty secret of learning English as an adult. It is not about intelligence. It is about emotional regulation. You cannot learn when you are terrified. You cannot speak when you feel judged. And I felt judged every single second of every single day. I got back into my car, placed the ticket on the passenger seat, and just sat there. I did not start the engine. I did not cry, not yet. I just stared at the steering wheel and let the silence wash over me. And in that silence, a very dark thought crept in. What if I just gave up? What if I stopped trying to speak English, stopped trying to impress the neighbors, stopped trying to be the perfect immigrant wife and mother, and just retreated into my little bubble where I could only speak my native language and never have to worry about conjugating irregular verbs again? It sounded so peaceful, so tempting. But the moment I let myself imagine that life, I felt a loneliness so deep it scared me. Because giving up did not mean freedom, it meant isolation. It meant building a wall between myself and my husband, between myself and my kids who were growing up speaking English faster than I could learn it, and between myself and the entire world outside my front door. That was not a life. That was a prison. And I realized, in that cramped, messy minivan, that I had a choice. I could let that ticket define me as a failure, or I could use it as a wake-up call to change the way I approached everything. My language, my marriage, and my entire existence in this wild, confusing, wonderful country. But wait, because this is where the story takes its first real turn. I drove home that afternoon feeling defeated, and I tossed the ticket onto the kitchen counter with a heavy sigh. My husband, bless his practical American heart, said, "It's just a fine. We'll pay it. Don't worry." But I could see in his eyes that he did not get it. He never got why small things like this broke me, because to him, America was home, and parking tickets were just part of life. To me, they were proof that I was still an outsider. That night, I lay awake for hours, replaying every mistake I had made since arriving. From mispronouncing my own address on the phone to accidentally calling a colleague sweetheart instead of sweetie and getting an awkward stare. It felt like my entire existence was one big grammatical error. But somewhere around 2 a.m., a weird thought floated into my exhausted brain. What if the problem was not my English, but my pace? What if I had been trying to run a marathon when I should have been learning to crawl? That thought planted a seed, and that seed would eventually grow into the entire philosophy of slow, easy English that I am sharing with you today. But that seed needed water, and the water came in the most unexpected form, from a complete stranger. So here we are, at the edge of a cliffhanger, because I cannot tell you everything at once, or you will have no reason to come back for the next part. But I will give you this one little nugget of curiosity. The ticket that made me feel so small, so invisible, and so hopeless ended up being the catalyst for an act of kindness, so anonymous, so bafflingly generous, that it restored my faith in humanity at a time when I had none. And that act did not just change my day, it changed my entire outlook on learning English, on trust, and on the hidden goodness of strangers in a country that often feels designed to test every last nerve you have.
How? Why?
And who would do such a thing for someone they had never even met? That is the story I am going to unfold for you over the next parts, slowly, clearly, with all the emotional twists and linguistic turns that come with living a life between two worlds. But for now, I want you to take a deep breath. Look at that ticket or whatever metaphorical piece of yellow paper is staring at you in your own life. And ask yourself this: What if the thing that is breaking you right now is actually the thing that will set you free? I know that sounds cheesy, but cheese is delicious, and sometimes the most cliché questions hold the most hidden truths. So stay with me. Keep listening. And remember, learning English is not a race. It is a walk through a very strange, very beautiful garden, and I am right here walking beside you, holding the map, the weight of a new world. Now that we have gotten that parking ticket out of the way, well, not out of the way yet. It is still sitting on my kitchen counter like a tiny yellow time bomb. Let's talk about something much bigger than a fine. Something that no amount of money can fix and no amount of vocabulary drills can prepare you for. The sheer, crushing, bewildering weight of landing in a completely new world where everything from the weather to the way people say hello feels like it was designed by a different species. Imagine waking up one morning and suddenly realizing that the sky is a different shade of blue, that the birds sing in a different rhythm, and that the very air you breathe carries a scent you cannot quite name, but which makes your stomach twist with the uncomfortable knowledge that you are not home. That was my first year in America, and let me tell you, it was not the glamorous immigrant fairy tale they show in those cheesy feel-good movies where someone steps off a plane, squints at the Statue of Liberty, and immediately finds a dream job and a quirky best friend. No, my reality was far messier, far lonelier, and far more confusing. And it all started with the little things I never even thought about back in my own country, like how to sort recycling, how to understand sales tax, or why everyone seemed so obsessed with peanut butter. You see, culture shock is not just about language. It is about the invisible architecture of daily life that you use to navigate on autopilot suddenly becoming a maze with no map. Take the weather, for example. I grew up in a tropical climate where seasons were merely suggestions, where you could wear sandals in December and not freeze your toes off. But here, in my new American town, winter hit me like a freight train made of ice and existential dread. The first time I saw snow, I was genuinely enchanted. It was like confetti falling from heaven. But by the third month, when I had to shovel my driveway at 6 a.m. while my breath turned into little clouds of despair, that enchantment had curdled into a bitter resentment. Nobody warned me that snow is not just beautiful, it is also wet, heavy, and incredibly inconvenient. And it forces you to learn new vocabulary like ice scraper and wind chill factor, and why did I ever leave my warm, sunny homeland? And let us not forget the infamous American small talk, which is a whole other beast entirely. Back home, if you ask someone, "How are you?" you actually expected a real answer. Maybe a story about their sick mother or their promotion at work. But here, "How are you?" is a greeting, not a question, and the expected response is a cheerful, "Good, you?" delivered with a smile that does not quite reach your eyes. I learned this the hard way when I once told a cashier that I was feeling a bit anxious about my immigration paperwork, and she just blinked at me, like I had suddenly started speaking Martian. But the cultural differences went far deeper than weather and pleasantries. They bled into everything, even the most mundane things like grocery shopping. Do you have any idea how many types of bread there are in an American supermarket? It is overwhelming. There is white bread, wheat bread, whole grain, multigrain, sourdough, rye, pumpernickel, brioche, and about 17 varieties of something called artisanal that costs as much as a small car. And do not even get me started on the cheese aisle. It is a labyrinth of dairy products that I am convinced was designed by a sadist. I used to stand there for 20 minutes paralyzed, trying to decide between cheddar and Colby Jack, while other shoppers breezed past me with the effortless confidence of people who had been navigating this cheese jungle since birth. It sounds trivial, I know, but these tiny daily dilemmas added up to a constant, low-grade hum of anxiety that never really went away. It was like being a character in a video game who had skipped the tutorial and was now trying to complete the final boss level without knowing how to.
Jump.
And then there is the law. Oh, the laws. America has rules for everything, and they are not always written down in a way that makes sense to an outsider. You cannot jaywalk without risking a fine. You cannot park in front of a fire hydrant. You cannot even hang your laundry outside in some neighborhoods because of something called Homeowners Association regulations that I still do not fully understand. It felt like I was walking through a minefield, constantly terrified that I would accidentally break a rule I did not even know existed. That parking ticket I mentioned earlier? It was just one of many instances where I felt like the system was designed to punish people like me, people who were still learning, still stumbling, still trying to figure out the unspoken codes of American life. I remember reading about a woman who got fined for having a lawn that was too tall, and I thought, really? You can get in trouble for grass? In my home country, grass was just grass. Nobody cared if it was a little shaggy. But here, appearances matter. Lawns are a status symbol, and your front yard is essentially a billboard advertising your competence as a human being. The pressure was suffocating. Psychologically, what I was experiencing was a classic case of what researchers call acculturative stress, the psychological impact of adapting to a new culture, which often manifests as anxiety, depression, confusion, and a deep sense of loss. You are not just learning a new language. You are mourning your old life, your old identity, and all the things that made you feel competent and respected. In my home country, I was someone. I had a reputation, a network, a sense of belonging. Here, I was a blank slate, but not the exciting kind, the kind that makes you feel invisible. Like you have to prove your worth all over again from scratch. And the worst part was that nobody around me really understood what I was going through. My husband, sweet as he was, had never been an immigrant. He had never felt the sting of being reduced to a stereotype, or the exhaustion of translating every single thought in your head before you speak it out loud. He saw America as home, with all its quirks and flaws, but to me, it was a foreign planet where I was constantly misreading social cues and accidentally offending people without even knowing why. There was this one time at a dinner party where I tried to compliment the hostess on her cooking, but instead of saying, "This is delicious," I somehow managed to say, "This is interesting," which in American English is code for, "I hate this, but I am too polite to say it." The silence that followed was deafening, and I spent the rest of the night trying to overcompensate by eating 3 servings of the dish, which only made me look like a glutton. I went home that night and cried in the bathroom because I realized that even my compliments were landing wrong. That is the insidious thing about culture shock. It makes you second-guess every single thing you do, until you start to wonder if you are actually losing your mind or if everyone else is just in on a joke you are not privy to. It is exhausting, and it wears you down over time until you feel like a shadow of your former self. But here's the part that nobody tells you. That exhaustion, that feeling of being perpetually out of step, is actually your brain working overtime to create new neural pathways. Yes, you heard me right. Every time you struggle to understand a new accent, every time you mispronounce a word and get corrected, every time you feel that sting of embarrassment, your brain is literally rewiring itself to adapt to this new environment. Neuroplasticity is a beautiful thing, but it is also painful, like growing pains for your mind. You are essentially building a new set of mental muscles, and just like physical exercise, it hurts before it gets better. The problem is, when you are in the middle of it, you cannot see the progress. You only feel the pain. So you start to believe that you are not making any progress at all, that you are stuck in this perpetual state of inadequacy, and that everyone else is effortlessly thriving while you are drowning in a sea of confusion. I remember going to a parent-teacher conference at my son's school, and realizing that I understood about 60% of what the teacher was saying. The other 40% was a blur of educational jargon and rapid-fire English that left me nodding and smiling like a bobblehead, pretending I understood when I was actually praying that nobody would ask me a follow-up question. It was humiliating, not because I was stupid, but because I had been a competent professional in my previous life. And now I could not even follow a conversation about my own child's reading level. That is when I started to question everything. My decision to move, my marriage, my ability to be a good mother, my entire identity. I felt like I had made a terrible mistake and that I was dragging my family down with me. It was the lowest point of my life, and I am not exaggerating when I say that I seriously considered packing my bags and going back home, even if it meant leaving my husband and my kids behind, because I was convinced that they would be better off without me dragging them into my mess. But then something shifted. It was not a grand revelation or a dramatic intervention. It was just a small, almost imperceptible change in perspective. I was sitting in my car after that disastrous parent-teacher conference, feeling sorry for myself, when I noticed a group of immigrant mothers in the parking lot, chatting and laughing in a mix of Spanish and broken English. They were not perfect, they were not fluent, but they were connected. They had found each other, and they were building a community out of their shared struggles. Watching them, I realized that I had been trying to do this alone, as if admitting that I needed help was a sign of weakness. I had been so focused on blending in, on becoming American, that I had forgotten that the whole point of this journey was not to erase my old self, but to integrate it with my new self. I did not have to choose between being who I was and becoming who I wanted to be. I could be both. A little bit of the old and a little bit of the new, like a cultural hybrid that was unique and valuable in its own right. That realization was the first step toward healing, but it was only the beginning. I still had a long way to go, especially in my marriage, which was starting to show cracks under the pressure of our cultural differences. My husband and I came from such different worlds that sometimes I felt like we were speaking entirely different languages, even when we were both using English. He was pragmatic and solution-oriented. I was emotional and needed to process things verbally. He would try to fix my problems. I just wanted him to listen. And neither of us understood why the other person could not just get with the program. It was exhausting, and our arguments became more frequent and more bitter, until I started to wonder if we had made a mistake in getting married at all. But that is a story for another section, because right now I want you to hold on to this thought. The weight of a new world is heavy, but you do not have to carry it all at once. You can put it down for a little while, take a breath, and remind yourself that you are not a failure because you are struggling. You are a pioneer, a brave soul who took a leap into the unknown, and that takes more courage than you give yourself credit for. So be kind to yourself, friend, because the journey is long, but it is also worth every single difficult step. The voice in my head. Now that we have established just how heavy the weight of a new world can be, and trust me, that weight is real. It sits on your chest like a cat that refuses to move. Let us zoom in on something even more intimate. Something that nobody can see from the outside, but that controls every single interaction you have, every smile you force, and every word you swallow before it reaches your lips. The voice in your head. You know the one I am talking about, that relentless, nagging, hypercritical inner narrator that sounds suspiciously like your third-grade English teacher mixed with a slightly judgmental movie critic. For me, that voice was not just annoying, it was downright tyrannical, and it spent every waking moment reminding me that I was not speaking correctly, that my accent was too thick, that my grammar was a disaster, and that everyone around me was silently laughing at my linguistic struggles. It was like having a permanent heckler in the front row of my own life, and that heckler did not just ruin my confidence. It completely silenced me, turning what should have been simple conversations into high-stakes performances where one wrong word could lead to total social annihilation. Let me paint you a picture because I want you to really feel what I am talking about. Imagine you are at a coffee shop and you want to order something as basic as a latte. Back in your home country, you could do this with your eyes closed, throwing in a little small talk with the barista just for fun. But here in America, the moment you step up to the counter, your heart starts racing like you are about to give a TED Talk to 1,000 people. Your palms get sweaty, your throat tightens, and suddenly the menu that seemed perfectly clear 5 minutes ago now looks like it is written in ancient Sanskrit. You rehearse the sentence in your head. I would like a medium latte with oat milk, please. Simple, right? But then the voice chimes in. Wait, is it I would like or I'd like? Are you supposed to say medium or grande? What if they ask you a follow-up question? What if you cannot understand their response? What if they have a thick southern accent and you have to ask them to repeat themselves 3 times and they get annoyed and you hold up the line and everyone stares at you? By the time you actually open your mouth, what comes out is a garbled mess of syllables that vaguely resembles the original sentence. And the barista gives you a confused look and asks you to repeat yourself, which only confirms your worst fears that you are a linguistic failure. And the worst part? This happens every single day, multiple times a day, for everything from ordering food to making phone calls to answering the door for the UPS driver. It is exhausting, demoralizing, and it makes you want to just stay home and never speak to another human being again. But here is the scientific twist that I wish someone had explained to me back then. That voice in your head is not actually your enemy. It is your brain's misguided attempt to protect you from embarrassment and rejection. You see, humans are social creatures, and our brains are wired to avoid situations that might threaten our social standing because, evolutionarily speaking, being ostracized from the tribe used to mean death. So when you are about to speak in a language you are not fully comfortable with, your brain perceives it as a potential social threat and triggers your fight or flight response, flooding your system with adrenaline and cortisol, which makes you anxious, forgetful, and tongue-tied. It is a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more afraid you are of making a mistake, the more likely you are to make one, and the more mistakes you make, the more your brain reinforces the belief that speaking English is dangerous. It is a vicious cycle, and once you are trapped in it, it feels impossible to break free because every attempt to speak just confirms your fears. I remember one particular incident that perfectly encapsulates this nightmare. I had to call the doctor's office to schedule an appointment for my daughter, who had a persistent cough that would not go away. The phone rang, and I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears as I mentally rehearsed what I was going to say. Hello, my name is... I practiced, and I need to schedule a checkup for my daughter. Simple, straightforward, no problem. But when the receptionist answered with a cheerful, "Good morning, this is Dr. Smith's office. How may I help you?" my mind went completely blank. It was like someone had hit the delete button on all my English vocabulary, and I was left standing there, mouth open, making sounds that were not quite words. I managed to stammer out something about daughter and cough and appointment, but the receptionist could not understand me because my accent was too thick and my words were too jumbled. She asked me to repeat myself, and I did, but I was so flustered that I accidentally said cough as coffee, which made absolutely no sense. And I could hear the confusion in her voice as she asked, "You need a coffee for your daughter?" I wanted to dissolve into the floor. I wanted to hang up and pretend the call never happened, but I could not, because my daughter needed medical care, and I was the only one who could make that call happen. I eventually got through it, but it took about 10 agonizing minutes, and by the end, I was shaking and on the verge of tears, convinced that everyone in the office was laughing at me. That experience, and countless others like it, built up a wall of anxiety around my ability to speak English that was so high and so thick that I began to avoid any situation that required me to speak more than a few words. I stopped answering the phone. I stopped going to social events. I stopped talking to other parents at my kids' school. And I even started avoiding my husband because I was afraid that even he would judge my imperfect English. It was a lonely, isolating existence. And the irony was that the more I isolated myself, the less I practiced and the worse my English got, which only confirmed my belief that I was hopeless. I was trapped in a prison of my own making, and the guard was that relentless voice in my head that kept whispering, "You cannot do this. You are not good enough. You will never sound like a native speaker, so why even try?" It was like a broken record, playing the same negative message over and over until I started to believe it was the absolute truth. But here is the thing that finally started to crack that wall. I realized that the voice in my head was not speaking the truth. It was just repeating old fears and insecurities that had nothing to do with my actual abilities. I started to pay attention to how I talked to myself, and I noticed that I would never speak to a friend the way I spoke to myself. I would never tell a friend, "You sound stupid. You should just give up." So, why was I saying it to myself? That realization was a turning point because it made me understand that I had been my own worst enemy, and that the only way to silence that critical voice was to actively replace it with a kinder, more compassionate one. It was not easy, and it did not happen overnight. But I started practicing what psychologists call cognitive reframing, the technique of consciously challenging negative thoughts and replacing them with more balanced, realistic ones. Every time that voice said, "You're going to embarrass yourself," I would counter with, "You are learning, and learning involves making mistakes. And that is okay." Every time it said, "Everyone is judging you," I would remind myself that most people are too busy worrying about their own lives to spend time critiquing my grammar. And every time it said, "You will never get better," I would point out all the progress I had already made, no matter how small. I also started to realize that fluency is not about perfection, it is about communication. You do not need to sound like a CNN anchor to be understood. You just need to be clear enough to get your point across. And most native English speakers are incredibly forgiving of mistakes, especially when they know you are learning. In fact, many of them are genuinely impressed that you are even trying because learning a new language as an adult is ridiculously hard. And they know it. I remember one kind cashier at the grocery store who, after listening to me fumble through a question about where to find the baking soda, smiled and said, "Your English is really good, you know that?" And I almost cried right there in the aisle because nobody had ever said that to me before. It was such a small, simple comment, but it meant the world to me because it was the first time I had received external validation that countered the negative voice in my head. Another strategy that helped me was what I call exposure therapy, with training wheels. Instead of throwing myself into high-stress situations where I knew I would panic, I started creating low-stakes environments where I could practice speaking without the fear of judgment. I would talk to my dog in English. I would narrate my daily activities out loud when I was home alone. And I would practice common conversations in front of a mirror until they felt more natural. I also started listening to English podcasts and audiobooks at a slower speed, focusing on pronunciation and intonation rather than trying to understand every single word. It was like learning to walk again, but instead of getting frustrated by my stumbles, I started to see them as part of the process, little stepping stones on the path to fluency. And slowly, painfully, but undeniably, I began to notice a shift. The voice in my head did not disappear entirely, but it got quieter, and its place was gradually taken by a new voice, a calmer, more confident one that said, "You can do this one sentence at a time." So let me ask you, if you are listening to this and you recognize yourself in my story, what is the voice in your head telling you right now? Is it telling you that you are not smart enough, not fast enough, not good enough to ever master this language? Because I am here to tell you, from the bottom of my heart, that that voice is a liar. You are capable of so much more than you give yourself credit for, and every single mistake you make is not a failure. It is a data point, a lesson, a step forward on the long and winding road to fluency. And you do not have to travel that road alone. I am right here with you, sharing my story, sharing my struggles, and sharing the hope that if I can do it, so can you. But we are not finished yet, because the voice in my head was only one part of the puzzle. There was also the voice of my husband, my friends, and the entire culture around me that shaped my experience in ways I did not fully understand until much later. And that, my friend, is exactly what we are going to explore in the next section, so stay tuned, keep breathing, and remember that you are not alone in this beautiful, chaotic, language learning adventure. A love story in the making. Now that we have wrestled with that pesky inner critic and started to quiet the voice that tells us we are not good enough, let us pivot to something far more complicated, far more beautiful, and far more terrifying than any parking ticket or awkward phone call. Love. Specifically the kind of love that crosses borders, defies logic, and forces two people from completely different worlds to figure out how to build a life together without killing each other in the process. You see, before I became the woman standing in that parking lot, clutching that yellow slip of paper like a lifeline, I was just a girl who had fallen head over heels for an American man, and that fall was the most exhilarating, confusing, and transformative experience of my entire existence. It was not a love story straight out of a Hollywood rom-com. There were no meet cuties in the rain, no dramatic airport chases, and definitely no spontaneous dance numbers. But it was real, messy, and utterly human, and it taught me more about language, culture, and the art of compromise than any textbook ever could. Let me take you back to the very beginning, because every love story deserves a proper origin story. And ours started in the most unromantic place imaginable, a crowded, fluorescent-lit classroom at a community college where I was taking an ESL course, and he was volunteering as a conversation partner. His name was Mike, and he was tall, slightly awkward, with a kind smile and an unfortunate tendency to wear novelty socks that featured cartoon dinosaurs. I noticed him immediately, not because he was particularly handsome, although he was in that earnest, boy-next-door kind of way, but because he had this disarming habit of actually listening when people spoke, of leaning in and nodding and making you feel like your words mattered, even when those words were halting and grammatically questionable. He was unlike anyone I had ever met, and the first time he asked me about my hometown, I found myself telling him things I had not even told my closest friends back home, about my childhood, my dreams, my fears about starting over in a new country. He listened without judgment, without that impatient flicker in his eyes that said, "Hurry up and get to the point." And in that moment, something shifted inside me, something that I would later recognize as the first stirrings of love. But here's the thing about falling in love with someone from a different culture. It is not just about learning each other's languages. It is about learning each other's emotional dictionaries, the hidden meanings behind the words, the unspoken rules that govern how you express affection, anger, and everything in between. For example, in my culture, love is often expressed indirectly, through actions rather than words, through cooking elaborate meals, through sacrificing your own comfort for the sake of your loved ones, through a kind of quiet, steady devotion that does not need to be verbalized every 5 minutes. In Mike's American culture, however, love is loud, explicit, and constantly affirmed. He would say, "I love you" at least 10 times a day, and at first, I did not know how to respond because I was not used to hearing those words so frequently, and I worried that if I said them back too often, they would lose their meaning. He, on the other hand, was baffled by my reluctance to verbalize my feelings, interpreting my silence as coldness or disinterest, when in reality I was just trying to process this foreign language of love that felt so different from the one I grew up with. Our cultural differences extended to almost every aspect of our relationship, from the mundane to the profound.
Take conflict, for example.
In my culture, arguments are often subtle and indirect. You hint at your dissatisfaction. You withdraw. You hope that the other person will pick up on your emotional cues and adjust their behavior accordingly. Direct confrontation is seen as rude and confrontational, a last resort when all other forms of communication have failed. Mike, however, was raised in a culture where directness is valued, where you are encouraged to say what you mean and mean what you say, and where avoiding conflict is often seen as dishonest or cowardly. So when we had our first real disagreement, it was a disaster. I was dropping subtle hints, hoping he would read my mind, and he was waiting for me to just tell him what was wrong. And we ended up in this frustrating stalemate where both of us felt unheard and misunderstood. I remember thinking, are we even speaking the same language? And the answer, metaphorically speaking, was no. We were speaking two different love dialects, and we had not yet learned how to translate between them. There was also the issue of personal space and independence, which, as I quickly learned, is a huge deal in American culture. Mike was fiercely independent, almost to a fault. He valued his alone time, his personal projects, his ability to make decisions without consulting anyone else. In my culture, however, relationships are more interdependent. You make decisions together. You consult each other. You prioritize the collective over the individual. So when Mike would make plans without asking me first, I would feel hurt and excluded, interpreting his actions as a sign that he did not value my input. He, in turn, would feel suffocated by what he perceived as my neediness, my constant desire to be included in every aspect of his life. It took us months and countless arguments to realize that neither of us was wrong. We just had different expectations about what a relationship should look like. And if we wanted to make this work, we needed to create our own hybrid culture, a third space where both of our needs were acknowledged and respected. But perhaps the most significant challenge, the one that almost broke us more times than I care to admit, was the power imbalance created by my language limitations. Mike was a native English speaker, fluent and confident, and I was still stumbling through basic conversations,
Constantly worried about making mistakes.
This created a dynamic where he naturally took the lead in any situation that required language, making phone calls, dealing with bureaucracy, even ordering food at restaurants, and I would shrink into the background, feeling helpless and resentful. I resented him for being so competent, even though it was not his fault, and he resented me for resenting him because he was just trying to help. It was a toxic cycle. The more he helped, the more dependent I felt, and the more dependent I felt, the more I pulled away, until we were living together but feeling miles apart. I remember one particularly bad fight where I screamed at him, in broken English, "You do not understand. You never have to think about words. You just speak." And he looked at me with such confusion and hurt in his eyes that I immediately regretted my outburst. But the truth was, he really did not understand, because he had never experienced the sheer exhaustion of having to translate every single thought before expressing it, the constant mental gymnastics that left me drained and irritable by the end of the day. And yet, despite all these challenges, we kept trying. We kept showing up for each other, kept apologizing, kept learning. We started going to couples counseling, which was its own special adventure, because we had to explain our cultural differences to a therapist who had no idea about the nuances of our specific dynamics. We read books about intercultural relationships. We attended workshops. We even started a cultural exchange ritual where every week we would teach each other one thing about our respective cultures. One week I would teach him how to cook a traditional dish from my homeland, and the next week he would explain the rules of American football, which I still do not fully understand, but at least now I can pretend to care when he watches the Super Bowl. Slowly, painfully, but undeniably, we started to build a bridge between our two worlds, a bridge made of patience, humor, and a willingness to be vulnerable with each other even when it felt scary. Looking back, I realized that our love story was not just about two people falling in love. It was about two cultures learning to coexist, to compromise, to create something new out of the collision of their differences. And that, in many ways, is exactly what learning a new language is like. You are not just memorizing vocabulary and grammar rules. You are learning a whole new way of thinking, feeling, and relating to the world. Mike did not just teach me English. He taught me to be more direct, more assertive, more willing to say what I needed and wanted without feeling guilty about it. And I taught him to be more patient, more attuned to the subtle emotional cues that I had grown up reading, more willing to slow down and truly listen, not just to the words, but to the feelings behind them. We were each other's teachers, and our classroom was our entire life together. So, where does that leave us now? Well, let's just say that our love story was far from perfect, and it was about to face its biggest test yet, a test that would come in the form of financial stress, parenting disagreements, and the relentless pressure of trying to build a life in a country that did not always welcome us with open arms. But that is a story for another section, because right now I want you to take a moment and think about your own relationships, whether they are romantic, familial, or platonic. How do you navigate the differences between yourself and the people you love? What do you do when you feel misunderstood, or when your partner seems to be speaking a completely different language, even when they're using the same words as you? Because the truth is, we are all immigrants in the landscape of love, trying to find our way to each other across the vast, confusing territory of our own hearts. And if I can offer you one piece of advice, it would be this. Do not be afraid of the differences, because they are not obstacles to love. They are invitations to grow. The love that survives is not the love that is easy. It is the love that fights, that stumbles, that gets back up again. And that is exactly the love I am about to tell you about next. So stay with me, friend, because the best and hardest parts of this story are yet to come, and I promise you, they will change the way you think about love, language, and the strange, beautiful journey of becoming yourself in a new world. The storm before the calm. Now that we have explored the tender, complicated, and occasionally infuriating landscape of cross-cultural love, let us talk about what happens when that love is put through the ringer, when the honeymoon phase fades and reality crashes in like a tidal wave, leaving you gasping for air and wondering if you made a terrible mistake by hitching your wagon to someone who grew up eating peanut butter and jelly, while you were raised on something entirely different. And I am not just talking about food here. I am talking about everything from how you handle money to how you discipline your children to how you define success, happiness, and the very meaning of life itself. You see, Mike and I had managed to navigate the early stages of our relationship with a combination of puppy love, cultural curiosity, and sheer stubbornness. But once we got married and started building a life together, the real challenges began to surface. And they came at us fast and furious, like a storm that had been brewing on the horizon for months and finally decided to unleash its full fury upon our unsuspecting little family. And let me tell you, that storm was not just about rain and thunder. It was about sleepless nights with a colicky baby, about bank accounts that never seemed to have enough zeros, about disagreements that escalated from mild annoyance to full-blown screaming matches in the span of 30 seconds, and about the creeping, Insidious doubt that maybe, just maybe, we had been fools to think that love could conquer all. Let us start with the financial pressure, because nothing tests a marriage quite like money, especially when you are an immigrant trying to establish yourself in a country where the cost of living seems to increase every single year while your income struggles to keep up. Mike had a decent job, but it was not enough to support a family of 4 in a city where rent alone consumed nearly half of our monthly income. And my own career prospects were limited because my foreign credentials were not recognized in the United States, which meant I had to start from scratch, working low-paying jobs that had nothing to do with my education or experience, just to make ends meet. I went from being a respected professional in my home country to cleaning houses and stacking shelves at a grocery store. And the humiliation of that transition was almost unbearable, not because I thought those jobs were beneath me, but because I felt like I had lost all the hard-won achievements of my former life, like they had been erased simply because I had crossed a border. Mike tried to be supportive, but he could not fully understand the depth of my frustration because he had never experienced the gut-wrenching feeling of being reduced to a fraction of your former self, of having your entire identity stripped away and replaced with a label that said unskilled labor, regardless of the degrees and certifications you had earned through years of blood, sweat, and tears. And then there were the children. Oh, the children, those beautiful, exhausting, utterly relentless little beings who seemed to have a sixth sense for sensing when their parents were already at their breaking point, and then, choosing that exact moment to throw a tantrum, refuse to eat their vegetables, or wake up screaming in the middle of the night for no discernible reason. Raising kids is hard enough in your own country, surrounded by your own family, speaking your own language, but raising them in a foreign culture, with a partner who has completely different ideas about parenting, is like trying to build a house during an earthquake while someone is constantly changing the blueprints. Mike believed in structure, schedules, and rules. He wanted the kids to be in bed by 8 p.m. sharp. He wanted them to eat their meals without distractions. He wanted them to learn independence from an early age by letting them cry it out when they were upset. I, on the other hand, had been raised in a culture where parenting was more flexible, more nurturing, more focused on emotional connection than on strict discipline, where babies slept in their parents' bed until they were toddlers and crying was met with immediate comfort rather than a timer. Our parenting styles were like oil and water, and our disagreements about how to raise our children became the battleground for all our deeper frustrations, the arena where we fought out our differences about everything else because we could not find the words to address the real issues. I remember one particularly awful argument that started over whether our son should be allowed to watch 30 more minutes of television, and somehow escalated into a full-blown indictment of each other's entire cultural backgrounds, with me accusing Mike of being cold and emotionally distant, and him accusing me of being overbearing and unable to enforce boundaries. We were both exhausted, both overwhelmed, both feeling like we were failing as parents and as partners, and instead of supporting each other, we were tearing each other apart, saying things that we could not take back, things that revealed just how deep our cultural misunderstandings really went. He said something like, "You are too soft on them. They're going to grow up entitled and unable to handle the real world." And I shot back with, "At least my culture teaches children that they are loved unconditionally, not that they have to earn love by being perfect little robots." And the words hung in the air like a guillotine blade. And I saw the hurt in his eyes, the same hurt that I felt mirrored in my own heart. And I realized that we were not just arguing about television or bedtime or discipline. We were arguing about our deepest fears, about whether we had made a mistake, about whether we could ever truly understand each other. The pressure was relentless, and it was not just coming from inside our marriage. It was coming from everywhere. from the outside world that seemed determined to remind me that I was an outsider. From the well-meaning but tone-deaf relatives who asked intrusive questions about when I was going to get a real job. From the other mothers at the playground who formed cliques that I could never quite penetrate because I did not share their cultural references. Their childhood memories, their effortless ability to chat about the latest Netflix show without stumbling over the dialogue. I felt like I was drowning, like I was screaming for help in a language that nobody could understand. And the worst part was that the person I was supposed to be able to turn to, my husband, was just as lost and overwhelmed as I was. We were two people who loved each other, who had chosen each other against all odds. But we were also two people who were slowly being worn down by the cumulative weight of all our struggles. And it seemed like every single day brought a new crisis, a new reason to doubt our decision to build this life together. There were nights when I would lie awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to Mike's breathing as he slept peacefully beside me. And I would think about all the things I had left behind, my family, my friends, my career, my language, my entire identity, and I would wonder if it had all been worth it. I would remember the confident, capable woman I used to be, and I would struggle to recognize her in the tired, anxious, constantly second-guessing person I had become. I would think about my mother's gentle warnings before I left, her saying, "Are you sure about this? It will be so hard, so different." And I would feel a bitter pang of regret because she had been right. It was hard, it was different. It was everything she had warned me about and more. And yet, even in my darkest moments, there was a tiny flicker of something that refused to die, a stubborn voice that whispered, "You can do this. You have come too far to give up now." And that voice was the only thing that kept me going some days. The only thing that stopped me from booking a one-way ticket back home and never looking back. It was during one of those sleepless nights, in the depths of my despair, that I stumbled upon a concept that would ultimately change everything. The idea that stress, while painful, can also be a catalyst for growth. That the struggles we face in our relationships are not signs of failure, but opportunities for deeper connection. If only we are willing to lean into the discomfort instead of running away from it. I started reading about attachment theory, about how our early childhood experiences shape the way we relate to our partners. And I began to see how my own anxious attachment style, born from a childhood where love was conditional on achievement, was clashing with Mike's avoidance style, born from a childhood where expressing emotions was seen as a sign of weakness. It was like a light bulb went off in my head because suddenly all our conflicts made sense. They were not about who was right and who was wrong. They were about two wounded people trying to protect themselves in the only ways they knew how, and inadvertently hurting each other in the process. That understanding did not fix everything overnight, but it gave me a framework to work with. A way to step back from the heat of the moment and see the bigger picture, and that made all the difference. I also started to realize that the problems in our marriage were not just about culture or language or parenting. They were about the fundamental human need to feel seen, heard, and understood. And the tragedy is that we often push our partners away precisely when we need them the most. Because we are afraid that if we show them our true selves, they will reject us. That fear is universal, regardless of nationality or language. And acknowledging it was the first step toward breaking down the walls we had built between us. Mike and I started having conversations that were uncomfortable and raw, conversations where we admitted our deepest insecurities, where we confessed that we were scared of losing each other, where we asked for what we needed instead of expecting the other person to read our minds. It was not easy, and there were setbacks, but slowly, tentatively, we started to rebuild the trust that had been eroded by months of accumulated hurt. And then, just when I thought I had hit rock bottom, when I was convinced that our marriage was irreparable and that I would never feel at home in this country, Something unexpected happened, something so small, so seemingly insignificant, that I almost missed it. But it turned out to be the turning point of my entire story. It involved that parking ticket I mentioned at the very beginning. The one that had seemed like such a trivial annoyance compared to all the bigger problems in my life. And it came from a complete stranger who had no idea what I was going through, but whose anonymous act of kindness would restore my faith in humanity. At the exact moment when I needed it the most. But I am getting ahead of myself, because before I can tell you about that miracle, I need to take you to the very bottom of the pit. To the day I almost gave up on everything, my marriage, my language, my life in America, and show you just how dark things got before the light finally broke through. So stay with me, friend, because the next section is going to be the hardest one to tell. But it is also the one that contains the seeds of everything that came after, and I promise you, it will make every tear, every struggle, every sleepless night worth it in the end. The day I almost gave up. Now that we have weathered the storm of marital conflict, financial strain, and the relentless exhaustion of parenting in a foreign land, let me take you to the darkest place I have ever been. The moment when I stood at the edge of the abyss and seriously considered jumping, not physically, of course, but emotionally, psychologically, in every way that mattered, because the weight of everything I had been carrying had finally become too heavy, too crushing, too unbearable to hold any longer, and I was convinced that the only way to find peace was to let it all go. To surrender to the overwhelming sense of failure that had been stalking me like a shadow for months. To admit that I had been foolish to think I could build a new life in a new country with a new language and a new family, and to simply give up on everything I had worked so hard to achieve. It was not a dramatic, Hollywood-style breakdown with swelling music and a tearful monologue. It was quiet, almost mundane. The kind of despair that creeps up on you so gradually that you do not even notice it until you are already drowning. And by the time I realized how deep I had sunk, I was too tired to even try to swim back to the surface. Let me set the scene for you because I want you to understand just how ordinary this moment of crisis was. How unremarkable the circumstances that pushed me over the edge turned out to be. It was a Tuesday, nothing special about it. Just another gray, drizzly day in our small American town. The kind of day that makes you forget what the sun looks like and leaves you feeling like you are living inside a wet sponge. I had spent the morning at the grocery store, wrestling with a shopping cart that had a wonky wheel, trying to stick to a budget that seemed to shrink every single week. While my toddler screamed in the cart because I had refused to buy the rainbow-colored cereal that was basically just sugar in a box. I had managed to get through the checkout line without crying, which felt like a small victory. But then I got to the parking lot and realized that I had forgotten to buy the one thing I had actually gone to the store for, diapers, and I had to go back inside, wait in line again, and endure the judgmental stares of the other customers who were clearly wondering why this frazzled foreign woman could not get her act together. By the time I got home, I was already on the edge. But the real breaking point came when I opened the mail and found a stack of bills that we could not afford to pay, including a notice from the bank that our checking account was overdrawn by $50. Which meant we would be hit with overdraft fees that would only make our financial situation worse. I remember standing in my kitchen, surrounded by half-unpacked grocery bags and the chaos of everyday life, staring at those bills like they were written in a language I had never seen before, even though they were in English and I could technically read every single word. It was not the words that were the problem, it was the meaning behind them. The message they were sending that we were failing, that we were not making it, that all our efforts to build a stable life were not enough. I thought about my husband, who was at work, probably stressed out about his own problems, and I felt this overwhelming sense of isolation. Like I was trapped in a bubble that no one could penetrate, not even the person who was supposed to be my partner in everything. I thought about my kids, who were running around the living room, blissfully unaware of their mother's internal collapse. And I felt guilty for not being able to give them the life they deserved, the life I had promised myself I would provide when I decided to move to this country. And then I thought about myself, about the person I used to be, the confident, ambitious woman who had once believed she could conquer the world. And I could barely recognize that person in the exhausted, defeated shell I had become. The tears came then, not the gentle, cathartic kind that leave you feeling better afterward, but the ugly, gut-wrenching sobs that seem to come from somewhere deep in your soul, the kind that leave you gasping for air and wondering if you will ever be able to stop. I slid down to the floor, right there in my kitchen, surrounded by grocery bags and unpaid bills, and I let myself fall apart completely, because I had been holding it together for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to just let go. And as I sat there, crying on my cold, linoleum floor, a voice started to speak in my head. Not the critical one that usually berated me for my mistakes, but a different voice, a quieter, more insidious one that sounded almost reasonable, almost kind, like a friend who was trying to help me see the truth. It said, "Why are you doing this to yourself? You are clearly not cut out for this life. You are struggling with the language, struggling with the culture, struggling with your marriage, struggling with everything. You are not happy, and you are making everyone around you miserable too. Maybe it is time to admit defeat, to go back home, to accept that some dreams are not meant to be pursued. You have tried, you have really tried, but sometimes trying is not enough. Sometimes the smartest thing you can do is walk away before you do any more damage." That voice was so compelling, so seductive in its logic, that I almost believed it. I almost started mentally packing my bags, making plans to call my parents and ask them to buy me a plane ticket, figuring out how I would explain to Mike that I was leaving, that I was taking the kids and going back to my home country, that I could not do this anymore. And the scariest part was that a part of me felt relieved at the thought, like a weight was being lifted off my shoulders, because giving up seemed so much easier than continuing to fight a battle I was clearly losing. It was the path of least resistance, and in that moment it felt like the only path that made sense. I had been fighting for so long, struggling so hard, and I was just so tired. I wanted to sleep for 1,000 years and wake up in a world where everything was simple, where I did not have to translate every thought, where I did not have to prove my worth every single day, where I could just be myself without apology or explanation. But then, in the midst of my despair, something strange happened. I looked up and caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window, and I saw a face that was tear-streaked and exhausted, but also familiar. The face of someone who had survived things before, who had overcome obstacles, who had shown resilience in the face of adversity. And I asked myself a question that would change everything. Who are you to give up? It was not a judgmental question, not the voice of my inner critic trying to shame me into continuing. It was a genuine inquiry, a curiosity about my own identity and what I was capable of. I thought about all the women in my family, my grandmothers and aunts and cousins, who had faced their own struggles and emerged stronger on the other side. I thought about my mother, who had sacrificed so much to give me a better life, who had worked multiple jobs so I could get an education, who had believed in me even when I doubted myself. I thought about my daughters who were watching me, learning from me, absorbing everything I did and said, and I realized that if I gave up now, I would be teaching them that it is okay to quit when things get hard, that giving up is an acceptable response to adversity. And that was a lesson I refused to impart, no matter how tempted I was to take the easy way out. That moment of clarity did not magically fix all my problems. I still had unpaid bills, a strained marriage, and a language that felt like an impossible mountain to climb. But it gave me something I had been missing for a long time, a reason to keep going. It reminded me that I was not just doing this for myself. I was doing it for my family, for my children, for the legacy I wanted to leave behind. And I realized that giving up would not just be a personal failure. It would be a betrayal of everyone who had believed in me, everyone who had supported me, everyone who was counting on me to succeed. That thought was terrifying, but it was also empowering because it meant that I was not alone in this fight, that I had people in my corner. Even if they were far away, even if they did not fully understand what I was going through. I had a community, a history, a lineage of strong women who had faced their own battles and refused to back down, and I was part of that lineage, whether I felt like it or not. I also started to think about the concept of resilience, about what it really means to be resilient in the face of overwhelming odds. Resilience is not about never falling. It is about getting back up every single time you fall, about refusing to let the setbacks define you, about finding the strength to continue even when you feel like you have nothing left to give. And the truth is, resilience is like a muscle. It gets stronger the more you use it, the more you challenge it, the more you push through the pain and discomfort. Every time I chose to keep going, every time I decided to try again despite my failures, I was building that muscle, making myself stronger for the next challenge. And that was a powerful realization because it meant that my struggles were not meaningless. They were making me into a stronger, more capable person, someone who could handle whatever life threw at her. So I made a decision, right there on my kitchen floor, surrounded by the debris of my broken dreams and my messy life. I decided that I was not going to give up. I was not going to let the bills, the language barriers, the cultural differences, or the marital conflicts defeat me. I was going to keep fighting, keep trying, keep believing that I could build a life that was worth living, a life that I could be proud of, a life that my children could look up to. And I made a promise to myself that I would find a way to make things better, even if it was just one small step at a time, even if the progress was so slow that I could barely see it. Because that is what resilience is. It is the accumulation of small, seemingly insignificant victories that eventually add up to something meaningful, something transformative, something that changes the very fabric of your existence. And then, just as I was starting to feel a glimmer of hope, my phone buzzed with a notification that would change everything. It was an email from the city's parking department, confirming that a payment had been made on my outstanding ticket, the very ticket I had been ignoring because I could not afford to pay it, the ticket that had seemed like such a trivial problem compared to everything else, the ticket that had somehow, impossibly, been paid by an anonymous stranger. I stared at the screen, convinced that I was hallucinating, that my exhausted brain was playing tricks on me, but the email was real, and it said that the fine had been fully paid, with no explanation, no name, just a note that said someone believed in you. And in that moment, I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. Hope. Not the fragile, tentative kind that you are afraid to hold on to because it might shatter, but the deep, unshakable kind that comes from knowing that you are not alone, that there are good people in the world who are willing to help, that even in your darkest moment, kindness can find you. That parking ticket, the symbol of everything that had gone wrong, had become the symbol of everything that was about to go right. And my journey was far from over. It was only just beginning. The anonymous gift. Now that I have dragged you through the depths of my despair, through the kitchen floor sobbing and the almost giving up and the terrifying temptation to just walk away from everything I had worked so hard to build, let me tell you about the moment that changed absolutely everything. The moment that came completely out of nowhere and hit me like a thunderbolt of pure, unexpected grace. The moment when a complete stranger, someone I had never met and would probably never meet, reached across the vast, indifferent void of the universe and performed an act of kindness so simple and yet so profound that it single-handedly restored my faith in humanity, my belief in goodness, and my willingness to keep fighting for a life that had seemed so hopeless just hours before. I know that sounds dramatic, and maybe it is, but I cannot overstate how transformative that anonymous gift was, how it shifted something fundamental in my soul and made me see the world, and myself, in an entirely new light. And I want to tell you every single detail of that moment because it is the hinge on which my entire story turns, the pivot from darkness into light. The proof that even in the most desperate of circumstances, kindness can find you and change everything. Let me take you back to that afternoon. The same afternoon I had spent crying on my kitchen floor. The same afternoon I had seriously considered packing my bags and abandoning my American dream. The same afternoon when everything seemed hopeless and pointless and utterly broken. I was still sitting there, sniffling and exhausted, when my phone buzzed with an email notification. And I almost ignored it because I was too tired to deal with another piece of bad news, another bill I could not pay, another problem I could not solve. But something made me glance at the screen, and I saw that the email was from the city's parking department. And my heart sank even further because I assumed it was a reminder about the ticket I had been ignoring, a warning that my fine had increased or that my car was about to be booted or some other bureaucratic nightmare that I simply could not handle. But when I opened the email, I did not see a demand for payment. I saw a confirmation that a payment had been made, that my ticket had been fully paid, and that my balance was now zero. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and read the email again, convinced that I was hallucinating, that my exhausted brain had finally snapped and was inventing good news to compensate for all the bad. But the email was real, and it said that the payment had been made anonymously, with no name attached. Just a brief note in the comment section that read, "Someone believed in you." I stared at those words for what felt like an eternity, and I felt something crack open inside me. Something that had been frozen and hard for so long that I had forgotten it was even there. It was like a dam breaking, releasing a flood of emotions that I had been holding back for months. Gratitude, confusion, wonder, and above all, a sense of being seen, of being acknowledged, of mattering to someone I had never even met. I started crying again, but this time it was different. These were not tears of despair, but tears of relief, tears of joy, tears of pure, unadulterated disbelief that a stranger would go out of their way to help me, someone they did not know, someone whose language was imperfect and whose life was a mess, someone who had been feeling so invisible and insignificant that she had almost given up entirely. I thought about the note, "Someone believed in you," and I wondered who that someone could be, what had motivated them, how they had even known about my ticket in the first place. And I realized that it did not matter who they were, because what mattered was the message they had sent, that I was worth believing in, that my struggles were seen, that I was not alone in this fight. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. It was just a parking ticket. It was only $45. Why is this such a big deal? And you are right. Objectively speaking, it was a small amount of money, a minor inconvenience in the grand scheme of things. But here's the thing about small acts of kindness. They are never really small, because their impact is not measured in dollars or cents, but in the emotional resonance they create, the way they reverberate through your entire being and change the way you see the world. That anonymous gift was not just about the money. It was about the symbolism, the message that someone out there cared enough to reach out and help a complete stranger, to perform an act of generosity with no expectation of reward or recognition, to plant a seed of hope in soil that had seemed completely barren. It was a reminder that the world is not just filled with cold bureaucracy, indifferent strangers, and endless obstacles. It is also filled with kindness, compassion, and the quiet, unassuming goodness of ordinary people who choose to make a difference in ways that are often invisible to everyone except the person they are helping. I started to think about the psychology behind anonymous acts of kindness, why people do them, and why they have such a powerful effect on the recipients. Psychologists call it prosocial behavior, actions that benefit others without any obvious benefit to the person performing them. And research has shown that these acts trigger a cascade of positive emotions in both the giver and the receiver, releasing oxytocin, the love hormone, and creating a sense of connection that transcends the boundaries of race, language, and culture. It is like a ripple effect, where one act of kindness spreads outward and touches more people than the giver could ever imagine, creating a chain reaction of goodwill that can transform entire communities. And that is exactly what happened to me. That anonymous gift did not just pay my ticket, it paid forward into every aspect of my life, making me more willing to be kind to others, more open to receiving help, more hopeful about the future, and more determined to be the kind of person who would do the same for someone else someday. I spent the rest of that day in a daze, not really knowing how to process what had happened, but feeling lighter than I had in months. Like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders and replaced with a warmth that spread through my chest and made me smile for no reason at all. I called Mike, who was still at work, and I told him about the email, and I heard the surprise and relief in his voice as he said, "That's amazing. Who would do something like that?" I told him I did not know, that it was anonymous, that I had no way of finding out or thanking the person, but that I felt like the universe was telling me something, like this was a sign that I was not supposed to give up, that there was still good in the world, and that I needed to hold on to that hope and let it guide me through the darkness. Mike, who had been so worried about me, so stressed about our financial situation and our marital problems, sounded like he was crying too. And we had one of those rare, beautiful conversations where we both dropped our defenses and just talked, really talked, about how much we loved each other and how we were going to get through this together. That conversation was the beginning of our healing, the first step toward rebuilding the trust and connection that had been eroded by months of struggle. We started to make a plan, a real plan, not just vague hopes, but concrete steps we could take to improve our situation. We would look into financial counseling. We would find a therapist who specialized in intercultural couples. We would set aside time every week to just be together without distractions. And we would both commit to being more patient and understanding with each other. It was not a quick fix, and we knew it would take time, but for the first time in a long time, we felt like we had a direction, a purpose, a shared vision for our future that was not just about surviving, but about thriving. And it all started with that anonymous gift, that small act of kindness from a stranger who had no idea what they were setting in motion. I also started to think about the role of gratitude in my healing process. How that feeling of being grateful for the kindness of a stranger had shifted my perspective and made me see all the other good things in my life that I had been taking for granted. I started a gratitude journal, writing down 3 things I was thankful for every day. And at first it was hard because my brain was so wired to focus on the negative that I had to actively search for things to be grateful for. But the more I practiced, the easier it became. And I started to notice all the little moments of grace that were happening all around me. The way my daughter laughed when I tickled her. The way my son hugged me without being asked. The way the sun broke through the clouds on a rainy afternoon. The way a friend sent me a text just to check in. These were not big, dramatic events, but they were reminders that life was not just a series of struggles. It was also a gift, a precious, fleeting thing that deserved to be appreciated and celebrated. And here is the really beautiful part. That anonymous gift did not just change me, it changed the way I interacted with everyone around me. I started to look for opportunities to be kind to others, to pay forward the generosity I had received, to be the anonymous stranger who brightens someone else's day. I started leaving encouraging notes in library books, paying for the coffee of the person behind me in line, volunteering at my kids' school, and just generally being more present and compassionate in my interactions with people. And every time I did something kind, I felt that same warmth spreading through me, that same sense of connection and purpose. And I realized that kindness is not just a one-way street. It is a cycle, a continuous loop of giving and receiving that enriches everyone it touches. I also realized that the person who had paid my ticket had probably done it because someone had been kind to them at some point, and they were just passing it along. And now I was doing the same, and the chain of kindness was growing longer and stronger with every link. As I look back on that moment now, I see it as the pivot point of my entire story. The moment when I went from being someone who was drowning in despair to someone who was swimming toward the shore. From someone who felt invisible to someone who knew they mattered. From someone who was ready to give up to someone who was determined to keep going. And I am so grateful for that anonymous stranger, whoever they are, wherever they are, because they did not just pay a ticket, they paid forward a belief in me that I had lost in myself. And they reminded me that even in the darkest times, there is light. Even in the loneliest moments, there is connection. And even when everything seems hopeless, there is always, always hope. So if you're listening to this and you are feeling like I felt that day, like the world is against you, and there is no point in trying, I want you to know that there is someone out there who believes in you too, someone who sees your struggle and wants to help. And that help might come in the most unexpected way, from the most unexpected place, at the most unexpected time. All you have to do is keep your eyes open, keep your heart open, and be ready to receive the gift when it comes, because it will come. And that brings me to the next part of my story, the part where I took that restored faith and used it to transform my approach to language learning, to finally crack the code of slow, easy English, and to build a life that was not just bearable but truly, deeply beautiful. So stay with me, friend, because the best parts are still to come, and I promise you, they're going to be worth the wait. Restoring faith in humanity. Now that we have experienced the profound impact of that anonymous gift, that unexpected act of kindness from a stranger who believed in me when I had stopped believing in myself, let's take a moment to really unpack what happened, to explore the deeper psychological and emotional mechanisms that made such a small gesture so incredibly powerful. Because understanding why kindness works is the key to harnessing its power in your own life. And it is also the secret to unlocking a whole new approach to learning English that goes far beyond vocabulary lists and grammar drills and taps into something much more fundamental. Your belief in yourself, your trust in the world, and your willingness to keep going even when everything seems hopeless. You see, when that anonymous person paid my parking ticket, they did not just solve a financial problem. They solved an existential one, because they showed me that I was not invisible, that my struggles mattered, and that there was goodness in the world that I had stopped believing in. And that shift in perspective, that restoration of faith, was the catalyst for everything that came after, including my ability to finally, truly learn English in a way that felt natural and sustainable and even joyful. Let me explain the psychology behind this, because it is absolutely fascinating and it has huge implications for anyone who is trying to learn a new language or navigate a new culture. When you are an immigrant, when you are constantly struggling to communicate, when you feel like an outsider in every room you walk into, your brain goes into a state of chronic stress, And that stress literally changes the way your brain functions, making it harder to learn, harder to remember, harder to process new information, and harder to regulate your emotions. This is not just a feeling. It is a physiological reality, backed by decades of research on the impact of stress on cognitive function. Cortisol, the stress hormone I mentioned earlier, is like a chemical saboteur that floods your system when you feel threatened. And for an immigrant who is constantly navigating unfamiliar situations and linguistic challenges, that threat response can become a permanent state, a low-grade hum of anxiety that never really turns off, making every interaction feel like a potential minefield and every new word feel like an impossible hurdle. But here is the beautiful thing about kindness. It has the opposite effect on your brain. When someone shows you kindness, when you experience an act of generosity or compassion, your brain releases oxytocin, the bonding hormone, which counteracts the effects of cortisol and creates a sense of safety, connection, and well-being. This is not just a feel-good phenomenon. It has real, measurable effects on your ability to learn and grow. When you feel safe, when you feel seen and valued, your brain is more open, more flexible, more capable of forming new neural connections and retaining new information. You become less defensive, less anxious, more curious and engaged, and that is the ideal state for learning anything, including a new language. That anonymous gift did not just pay my ticket. It created a cascade of oxytocin in my brain that made me more receptive to learning, more willing to take risks, more open to making mistakes and learning from them, and that is why it was such a turning point in my journey. Think about it this way. Before that gift, I was stuck in a cycle of fear and failure. I was so afraid of making mistakes that I avoided speaking, and the more I avoided speaking, the worse my English became, which only increased my fear and my sense of inadequacy. It was a vicious cycle, a downward spiral that seemed impossible to break. But after that gift, something shifted. I felt like someone out there had my back, like there was a safety net beneath me, like even if I fell, there was a hand ready to catch me. That feeling of safety, of being supported, gave me the courage to take risks that I had never been willing to take before. I started speaking more, even when I knew I might make mistakes, because I realized that mistakes were not the end of the world, that people were not as judgmental as I had feared, and that even if I stumbled, I could always get back up and try again. It was like the weight of perfectionism had been lifted off my shoulders, and suddenly, learning English became fun, exciting, and liberating rather than terrifying and exhausting. I also started to notice a shift in the way I interacted with other people, because I felt more trusting, more open, more willing to connect. I started to attract kindness into my life in ways that I had never experienced before. People were more patient with me, more willing to help, more generous with their time and attention. And I realized that kindness is a reciprocal force, a mirror that reflects back whatever you put out into the world. When you approach others with openness and trust, they are more likely to respond in kind. And this creates a positive feedback loop that builds on itself, making the world feel like a safer, more welcoming place. This does not mean that everyone will be kind, or that there will not be difficult people and challenging situations. But it does mean that you have the power to influence the energy of your interactions, to create more moments of connection and compassion, and to build a community of support that can sustain you through even the toughest times. Now, I want to connect this back to learning English because that is ultimately what this story is about. And here is the key insight that I want you to take away from this section. The best way to learn a language is not through stress and pressure, but through safety and connection. When you feel safe, when you feel supported, when you feel like you belong, your brain is primed to absorb new information, to experiment with new sounds and structures, and to integrate everything you learn into a coherent, functional system of communication. This is why immersion works so well, not because you are forced to sink or swim, but because you are surrounded by the language in a context that feels natural and meaningful. A context that connects you to other people and to a sense of purpose and belonging. And this is exactly what I started to experience after that anonymous gift. I felt like I was part of something bigger, something good. Something that was worth investing my time and energy into, and that sense of purpose made all the difference. I started to approach language learning with a new mindset. A mindset that I want to share with you because I think it will transform the way you think about your own journey. Instead of focusing on what I did not know, on all the words and grammar rules I had not yet mastered, I started to focus on what I did know, on the progress I had already made, on the small victories that I could celebrate every single day. I started to think of myself not as a failure who could not speak English properly, but as a learner, a person who is on a journey of discovery, a person who is growing and evolving every single day. And that shift in perspective from deficit-based thinking to growth-based thinking was incredibly powerful because it changed the way I felt about my mistakes. Instead of seeing mistakes as evidence of my inadequacy, I started to see them as signs of progress, as proof that I was pushing myself outside my comfort zone, as stepping stones on the path to fluency. Every mispronounced word, every confused look from a native speaker, every awkward pause in a conversation became a gift, a learning opportunity, a chance to get better and stronger and more confident. I also started to incorporate more kindness into my learning routine, treating myself with the same compassion I would show a friend who was struggling. When I made a mistake, instead of berating myself with that critical voice in my head, I would say, that is okay, you're learning. And learning takes time. When I got frustrated with a difficult concept, I would take a break, breathe deeply, and remind myself that it was okay to not understand everything immediately. I started to celebrate my progress, no matter how small, learning a new word, understanding a podcast without subtitles, having a conversation that did not leave me completely exhausted. These small celebrations built momentum, and over time, they accumulated into a powerful sense of achievement that kept me motivated and engaged, even when the path got bumpy. And here is the really cool part. The more kind I was to myself, the more kind I was to others, and the more kind others were to me. And that created a virtuous cycle of positive reinforcement that made learning English feel less like a chore and more like a gift. I started to notice that when I approached conversations with curiosity rather than fear, people responded with warmth and patience. And those positive interactions reinforced my confidence and made me want to keep practicing. I started to seek out opportunities to speak English, not because I had to, but because I wanted to, because it felt good to connect with people, to share stories, to laugh together, to build relationships that transcended language and culture. A pathway to understanding and belonging, and when you approach it with an open heart and a curious mind, it becomes so much more than just words on a page or sounds in the air. So if you are listening to this and you are feeling discouraged, if you are struggling with your own language learning journey, I want you to remember this. It is not about being perfect. It is about being present. It is not about avoiding mistakes. It is about embracing them as part of the process. It is not about doing it alone. It is about finding connection, support, and kindness in the people around you and in yourself. And most importantly, it is about believing that you are worthy of the effort, worthy of the time, worthy of the struggle, and worthy of the success that is waiting for you on the other side. That anonymous stranger believed in me, and their belief gave me the courage to believe in myself. And now I am passing that belief on to you, because I know that you have what it takes to achieve your goals, to learn English, to build a life that is meaningful and fulfilling, and to become the person you were meant to be. So keep going, keep trying, keep believing, and never underestimate the power of a single act of kindness, whether it is given to you or by you, to change everything. And with that restored faith, I was ready to take on the next challenge, transforming my approach to learning English from a source of stress into a source of joy. And that is exactly what I am going to tell you about in the next section, so stay tuned, because the best is yet to come. The power of slow English. Now that we have explored the transformative power of kindness and the restoration of faith that came from that anonymous gift, let us talk about the practical application of all that emotional healing. Because the truth is that all the kindness in the world will not help you learn English if you do not have a strategy, a method, a way of approaching the language that works with your brain rather than against it. And that is exactly what I discovered when I finally abandoned the frantic, stressful, perfectionist approach that had been making me miserable and embraced something radically different, something slow, gentle, and surprisingly effective that completely changed my relationship with English and turned it from a source of anxiety into a source of joy and connection. And I want to share that method with you because I genuinely believe it is the key to unlocking your own language learning potential. No matter how many times you have failed before, no matter how frustrated you feel, no matter how hopeless the journey seems. You see, for the longest time, I had been approaching English like it was a race I had to win, like every conversation was a test I had to pass, like every new word was a hurdle I had to clear, and that frantic energy was exactly what was holding me back, because when you are racing, you are not learning. You are just surviving, just trying to get through the moment without embarrassing yourself. And that survival mode shuts down the very parts of your brain that are needed for deep, meaningful learning. It is like trying to memorize a complex piano piece while someone is chasing you with a stick. You might hit the right notes out of sheer panic, but you will not truly understand the music. You will not feel it in your soul. And you will certainly not be able to play it beautifully or creatively. That was me, hitting the right notes out of panic, but never really playing the music, never really connecting with the language in a way that felt natural and authentic. But after that anonymous gift restored my faith and gave me the courage to try a different approach, I started to experiment with something that seemed almost too simple to work. Something that went against every piece of conventional language learning advice I had ever received. Something that felt almost lazy, but turned out to be the most effective strategy one had ever encountered. I slowed down. I deliberately, consciously, and unapologetically slowed down everything about my language learning process. From the way I listened to the way I spoke to the way I read to the way I thought about English. And that slowing down was like magic, because it gave my brain the time and space it needed to actually process the language, to internalize the patterns, to build the neural connections that are essential for fluency, and to develop the confidence that had been so elusive when I was rushing through every interaction like my life depended on it. Let me give you a concrete example of what I mean. Before I discovered the power of slow English, I used to listen to podcasts and audiobooks at normal speed, trying desperately to catch every word, getting frustrated when I missed a phrase, and giving up after 10 minutes because my brain was exhausted from the effort. But when I slowed down the playback speed to 0, 75, or even 0.5, something amazing happened. I could actually hear every word. I could distinguish the individual sounds. I could notice the rhythm and intonation. And I could start to understand how the language was put together in a way that was impossible at normal speed. It was like the fog had lifted, and suddenly English made sense in a way it never had before, because I was giving my brain the time it needed to process the input, to map the sounds to the meanings, and to build the internal representation of the language that is essential for fluency. And the more I listened at a slower speed, the more I started to understand at normal speed. because my brain had built the foundation it needed to keep up with the faster pace.
The same principle applied to speaking.
Instead of trying to speak at the same speed as a native speaker, I started to speak more slowly, more deliberately, giving myself time to formulate my thoughts, to choose the right words, to get the pronunciation right, and to actually enjoy the process of speaking rather than feeling like I was in a verbal race that I was destined to lose. I noticed that when I spoke more slowly, people understood me better, they were more patient with me, and they did not look at me with that confused expression that used to make me feel so inadequate. They actually leaned in, listened more carefully, and responded more thoughtfully. And those positive interactions built my confidence and made me want to speak even more, which created a virtuous cycle that accelerated my learning in ways that all the frantic, high-pressure practice never could. I also started to read more slowly, savoring every sentence, looking up words I did not know, and really engaging with the text rather than just skimming it for the gist. I would read the same passage multiple times, first for comprehension, then for pronunciation, then for grammar, and then for enjoyment. And each pass would reveal new layers of meaning and new insights into the language that I would have missed if I had been rushing through it. I discovered that reading slowly was not a waste of time. It was an investment in deep learning, a way of building a strong foundation that would support all my future language acquisition, and that foundation was essential because without it, I was just building a house on sand, a house that would crumble at the first sign of stress or difficulty. And here is the really important insight that I want you to take away from this section. Slowing down is not just about pacing. It is about mindset, about approaching the language with curiosity rather than fear, with openness rather than defensiveness, with patience rather than urgency. When you slow down, you give yourself permission to make mistakes, to stumble, to take your time, to enjoy the journey rather than obsessing over the destination. You stop treating every interaction as a test of your worth and start treating it as an opportunity to learn, to connect, to grow. And that shift in mindset is transformative because it removes the pressure that has been holding you back and replaces it with a sense of possibility and potential. I started to incorporate slow English into every aspect of my daily life. I would listen to the same podcast episode on repeat for a whole week, gradually increasing the speed as my comprehension improved. And by the end of the week, I could understand it at normal speed without any trouble. I would practice conversations with myself in the mirror, speaking slowly and clearly, focusing on pronunciation and fluency rather than speed. I would write journal entries in English, taking my time to craft each sentence, to look up words I did not know, to experiment with different sentence structures, and to express my thoughts and feelings with the nuance and precision that had previously seemed impossible. I even started to think in English slowly at first, but gradually more naturally. And that shift from translating to thinking was the ultimate breakthrough because it meant that English was no longer a foreign language I had to process. It was becoming a part of my internal world, a tool for thinking and feeling and being that was just as natural as my native tongue. Now, I know that some of you might be thinking, but I do not have time to go slowly. I need to learn English quickly so I can get a job, or pass a test, or communicate with my family, or achieve some other urgent goal. And I totally understand that urgency, I really do, because I felt it too, and that urgency was exactly what was holding me back. But here is the paradox of language learning. Going slower actually makes you faster in the long run because the deep, solid foundation you build through slow, deliberate practice enables you to progress more quickly than you ever could through frantic, superficial cramming. It is like the difference between building a house on a solid foundation and building one on sand. The slow, steady approach might take a little longer at the beginning, but the house will stand strong for years, while the fast, shaky approach will collapse at the first sign of trouble, and you will have to start all over again. which is ultimately much slower and more frustrating. So I am going to give you a challenge, a simple but powerful challenge that I want you to try for the next week. Slow down your English practice. Listen to a podcast or video at 0.75 speed and really focus on understanding every word, not just the gist. Read a passage out loud, slowly and clearly, paying attention to your pronunciation and intonation. Practice a conversation with yourself, giving yourself time to formulate your thoughts, to choose the right words, to express yourself fully and completely. And most importantly, be kind to yourself in the process, because kindness is the fuel that makes slow English work. The compassion that allows you to make mistakes without judgment, the patience that enables you to keep going even when progress feels slow. I promise you, if you commit to this practice for just 1 week, you will notice a difference, not just in your English abilities, but in your confidence, your attitude, and your overall sense of well-being. The power of slow English is not just about language learning. It is about life itself, about learning to slow down, to be present, to appreciate the journey rather than obsessing over the destination, and to find joy in the process of becoming. That anonymous gift taught me that kindness exists, and slow English taught me that I am capable of more than I ever imagined, that I can learn this language, that I can build a life in this country, that I can be the person I want to be, and that it is not about being perfect. It is about being present, being patient, and being kind to myself and others along the way. So embrace the slow, my friend, because it is not a limitation. It is a liberation, a freedom from the tyranny of speed and perfection that has been holding you back, and a pathway to the fluency and confidence that you have been seeking all along. And once I had embraced that slow, gentle approach, I was finally ready to tackle the most important part of my journey, rebuilding my family, reconnecting with my husband, and creating the life that I had always dreamed of. The story of my family. Now that we have unlocked the power of slow English and transformed our approach to language learning from a frantic race into a gentle, patient journey, let me show you how all of that personal growth and healing started to ripple outward into the most important area of my life, my family, the precious, messy, complicated little tribe that had been through so much with me, the people who had witnessed my darkest moments and my greatest triumphs, the ones who had stuck by me even when I was at my most unbearable, and who were now starting to reap the benefits of my transformation in ways that I could never have imagined when I was crying on that kitchen floor, convinced that everything was falling apart and that I would never find my way back to happiness. You see, when I changed, everything around me changed too, because families are ecosystems, interconnected webs of energy and emotion where every shift in one member creates ripples that touch everyone else. And as I became calmer, more confident, more patient, and more present, my husband and my children responded in kind, and our entire household began to transform from a place of tension and struggle into a sanctuary of love, understanding, and genuine connection. And that transformation was one of the most beautiful and unexpected gifts of my entire journey. Let me start with my husband, Mike, because our relationship had been through the ringer. And I honestly did not know if we would survive all the pressure and conflict that had accumulated over the years. But as I started to approach life with more patience and less anxiety, as I stopped viewing every disagreement as a threat and started seeing it as an opportunity to understand each other better, something shifted between us. I started to communicate more clearly, using the slow, deliberate English that I had been practicing, taking the time to express my feelings without rushing or getting defensive, and I noticed that Mike responded differently too. He was less reactive, more willing to listen, more open to seeing things from my perspective, and we started to have the kinds of conversations we had not had in years. The kind where we really talked about what was going on inside us, about our fears and hopes and dreams, about the things we loved about each other and the things we wished were different. And those conversations were not always easy, but they were always healing, always bringing us closer together. One of the most powerful moments in our healing journey came when I decided to tell Mike the story of the parking ticket, not just the facts of what had happened, but the emotional journey behind it, the despair I had felt, the anonymous gift that had restored my faith, and the way it had changed my entire perspective on life and language and love. I told him in my slow, careful English, taking the time to find the right words, to express the depth of what I had experienced. And when I finished, I saw tears in his eyes, tears that told me he finally understood, truly understood, what I had been going through all these years. He held me and said, "I am so sorry I did not see it before. I am so sorry I did not understand how hard it was for you. I am so sorry I could not be the support you needed, but I am here now. And I am going to do better." And in that moment, I realized that he had not been indifferent or uncaring. He had just been as lost as I was, struggling in his own way. And we had both been so focused on our own pain that we had forgotten to see each other's. That conversation was a turning point in our marriage, the beginning of a new chapter where we committed to being more present for each other, more patient, more willing to listen and learn. We started having regular date nights, just the two of us, where we would talk without distractions, without phones or TVs, just connecting as two people who loved each other and wanted to build a life together. We started going for walks in the evenings, holding hands and talking about our days, about our kids, about our dreams for the future. And those simple, ordinary moments became the foundation of a deeper intimacy that I had not even realized we were missing. We also started to laugh more, to find humor in our cultural differences instead of frustration, to celebrate the unique perspective that each of us brought to our relationship, and to appreciate the richness that came from blending two different worlds into one shared life. And then there were my children, those beautiful, exhausting little beings who had been watching their mother struggle and had absorbed so much of my anxiety and stress without even understanding what was happening. As I became calmer and more grounded, I noticed that they were calmer too, less prone to tantrums and meltdowns, more willing to cooperate and communicate, and I realized that children are like sponges, soaking up the emotional energy of their parents. And when that energy is tense and anxious, they feel it and react to it. But when it is peaceful and loving, they feel that too. And they thrive in that environment. I started to parent differently, more slowly and mindfully, taking the time to really listen to my kids, to understand their needs and feelings, to respond with patience instead of frustration, and to model the kind of calm, compassionate communication that I wanted them to learn. I would speak to them in my slow, careful English, and they would respond in their fast, fluent English. And instead of feeling intimidated by their speed, I would just smile and keep going, because I knew that I was teaching them something far more important than vocabulary. I was teaching them about resilience, about perseverance, about the value of trying even when things are hard, and about the beauty of connecting with people across differences. One of my favorite new rituals was our family dinners, where we would go around the table and each person would share one good thing that had happened to them that day, and one thing they were grateful for. At first, my contributions were a bit awkward and stilted because I was still finding my voice in English, but as time went on, I became more comfortable, more fluent, more able to express my gratitude and joy in words that felt authentic and true. My kids loved this ritual, and they would compete to see who could come up with the most creative gratitude. And Mike would chime in with his own contributions, and we would all laugh and talk and connect in a way that felt so different from the tense, silent meals we used to have when I was too exhausted and overwhelmed to engage. These dinners became a sacred space, a time when we could put aside our devices and our worries and just be together as a family, celebrating our love for each other and our shared journey. I also started to involve my kids in my language learning, making it a family activity instead of something I struggled with alone. We would read books together in English, taking turns reading aloud and helping each other with difficult words. We would watch movies and TV shows and discuss them afterward, practicing our comprehension and conversation skills in a fun, low-pressure way. We would play word games and do crossword puzzles and even invent silly songs in English, and I was amazed at how much I learned from my children, who were so natural and effortless in their use of the language, and who were so patient and encouraging with their imperfect mother. They taught me slang and idioms and cultural references that I would never have learned from a textbook, and they gave me a window into the world of American childhood that I had been missing. A world of school plays and birthday parties and playground friendships that I could now participate in with confidence and joy. And through all of this, I started to feel a sense of belonging that I had never experienced before. A feeling that this was not just a country I was living in, but a home, a community, a place where I was accepted and valued for who I was, not just for how well I spoke the language. I started to make friends with other parents at my kids' school, immigrant and native alike, bonding over our shared love for our children and our shared desire to build a better world for them. I started to volunteer in the classroom, helping with reading and writing activities, and the teachers were so grateful for my help that they started to treat me like a colleague, not just a parent. I started to feel like I had something to contribute, something valuable to offer, and that sense of purpose and belonging was incredibly healing. A balm for all the wounds that had been inflicted by years of feeling like an outsider. And through it all, I never forgot that anonymous stranger who had paid my parking ticket and restored my faith. I thought about them often, wondering who they were and what had motivated them. And I made a promise to myself that I would pay their kindness forward, that I would be that anonymous stranger for someone else, that I would spread the love and generosity that had been given to me. I started to perform small acts of kindness in my community, leaving encouraging notes in public places, paying for the groceries of the person behind me in line, volunteering at the local food bank, and just generally being more present and compassionate in my interactions with others. I did not do these things for recognition or reward. I did them because it felt good, because it connected me to the world, because it reminded me of the goodness that exists even in the darkest times, and because I wanted to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. My family noticed these changes and they started to get involved too, joining me in my acts of kindness and making it a family value, a way of life that we all embraced together. We would make care packages for homeless shelters, donate toys to children's hospitals, and even just hold the door for strangers with a genuine smile. And these small acts of kindness created a sense of purpose and connection that enriched our lives in ways that no amount of money or success ever could. I realized that the true measure of a life is not how much you achieve for yourself, but how much you give to others, how much love you share, how much kindness you spread, and how much you help to make the world a better place simply by being in it. That is the legacy I want to leave for my children, not a legacy of wealth or status, but a legacy of compassion, generosity, and the unwavering belief that every single person is worthy of love and kindness, no matter where they come from or what language they speak. And so, as I look back on the journey that brought me here, from the despair of that parking lot to the joy of this family dinner table, I am filled with a profound sense of gratitude for all of it, the struggles and the triumphs, the tears and the laughter, the setbacks and the breakthroughs, because every single part of it was necessary. Every single part of it shaped me into the person I am today. And every single part of it led me to this moment, this beautiful, messy, imperfect but utterly wonderful life that I have built with the people I love. My family is not perfect, and we still have challenges and disagreements, but we have something far more important than perfection. We have love. We have commitment, and we have the shared belief that together we can overcome anything. And that, my friend, is the real story of my family, the story that I am honored to share with you, and the story that I hope will inspire you to believe in the power of slow, steady growth, the power of kindness and connection, and the power of never giving up on the people and the dreams that matter most to you. So hold on to your family, hold on to your dreams, and never, ever stop believing that better days are ahead, because they are, I promise you they are. And with that, I am ready to share the final chapter of my journey, the chapter where I truly found my home. And that is exactly what we will explore in the next section, so stay tuned, because the best is yet to come. A new beginning. Now that we have explored the transformation of my family, the healing of my marriage, and the joy of connecting with my children in ways I never thought possible, let me take you to the present moment, to the life I live today. The life that emerged from all those years of struggle and growth. The life that stands as living proof that the journey I have been describing to you is not just a series of random events, but a deliberate, intentional process of becoming, a process that continues to unfold every single day and that has brought me to a place of genuine peace, contentment, and belonging that I honestly did not think was possible when I was standing in that parking lot, clutching that yellow ticket and feeling like the world was ending. You see, the story does not end with the anonymous gift or the healing of my marriage or the discovery of slow English. It continues, it evolves, it grows, and the life I have built today is the culmination of everything I have learned, everything I have suffered, and everything I have overcome. And I want to share that with you, because it is the proof that change is real, that growth is possible, and that even the most desperate situations can lead to the most beautiful outcomes if you just keep going, keep believing, and keep putting one foot in front of the other. Let me paint you a picture of my life now, because I want you to see the contrast between where I was and where I am. And I want you to understand that this transformation was not magic. It was the result of consistent, patient, intentional effort. The kind of effort that anyone can make if they are willing to embrace the slow, steady approach that I've been advocating throughout this story. I wake up every morning in our cozy little house, the one that used to feel like a prison but now feels like a sanctuary. And I look out the window at the same gray, drizzly sky that used to fill me with despair, and now I see it differently. I see the beauty in the rain. The way it makes the grass greener and the air fresher. The way it washes away the dust and leaves everything clean and renewed. I make my coffee, the same coffee I used to drink with a knot of anxiety in my stomach, and now I savor it, taking the time to enjoy the aroma, the warmth, the simple pleasure of a quiet morning before the chaos of the day begins. I go about my daily routines, taking the kids to school, running errands, working on my projects, and I do it all with a sense of calm and purpose that I never had before because I have learned to slow down, to be present, to appreciate the small moments that make up a life, and to trust that I am capable of handling whatever comes my way. My children are thriving, and that is one of the greatest joys of my life. My daughter, who was just a toddler when I was crying on that kitchen floor, is now a confident, articulate teenager who speaks English with the effortless fluency of a native, and who also speaks my native language with a fluency that fills me with pride and reminds me that I have passed on something precious to her, something that connects her to her heritage and her history. My son, who used to have tantrums that would send me spiraling into anxiety, is now a thoughtful, empathetic young man who volunteers at the local animal shelter and writes poetry in both English and my native language. And I see so much of myself in him. His determination, his sensitivity, his willingness to keep going even when things are hard. They are not perfect children, of course. They argue with each other. They stay up too late. They forget to do their homework. But they are good, kind, loving kids who know that they are cherished. And that knowledge gives them the confidence to explore the world and to be themselves without fear or apology. Mike and I are in a place now that I honestly did not think we would ever reach. Our marriage is not perfect. No marriage is, but it is strong, resilient, and deeply loving, built on a foundation of mutual respect, understanding, and the shared commitment to grow together rather than apart. We still have disagreements, and sometimes those disagreements get heated, but we have learned to fight fair, to listen to each other, to apologize when we are wrong, and to find our way back to each other with forgiveness and grace. We have learned to appreciate our differences instead of letting them divide us, to celebrate the unique perspectives that each of us brings to our partnership, and to find humor in the cultural misunderstandings that used to cause so much friction. We laugh a lot now, and that laughter is one of the greatest gifts of our relationship. It is the sound of two people who have been through the ringer and come out the other side, stronger and more connected than ever before. My relationship with the English language has also transformed completely. I no longer view it as a threat, an obstacle, or a constant source of anxiety. I view it as a tool, a gift, a bridge that connects me to the world and to the people I love. I speak English every day with confidence and ease, not because I have become perfect, but because I have become comfortable with imperfection. Because I have learned that communication is not about being flawless, but about being present, about connecting, about sharing your thoughts and feelings with others in a way that is authentic and real. I still make mistakes, and sometimes those mistakes are embarrassing, but I have learned to laugh at them instead of being crushed by them, to see them as opportunities to learn and grow, and to appreciate that every mistake I make is a sign that I am pushing myself, that I am trying, that I am alive and engaged in the beautiful, messy process of being human. I have also become an advocate for other immigrants and language learners, using my story to inspire and support others who are going through the same struggles that I went through. I volunteer at a local community center, teaching English to new arrivals from all over the world, and I see so much of my former self in their faces. The fear, the frustration, the desperate desire to belong and to be understood. I listen to their stories, I validate their struggles, and I share my own journey with them, showing them that it is possible to overcome the challenges of immigration and language learning, that there is light at the end of the tunnel, and that they are not alone in their struggles. Teaching has been one of the most rewarding experiences of my life, because it reminds me of how far I have come and gives me the opportunity to give back, to pay forward the kindness that was given to me by that anonymous stranger, and to be the support system that I needed but did not have when I was starting out. And speaking of that anonymous stranger, I still think about them often, and I have come to believe that they were not just a random person who happened to pay my ticket. They were a messenger, a reminder that the universe is full of kindness, that goodness exists even in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes all it takes is one small act of compassion to change someone's entire life. I do not know who they are, and I will probably never meet them, but I carry their kindness with me every day. And I try to honor it by being kind to others, by being the anonymous stranger for someone else, and by spreading the love and generosity that I received in my darkest moment. I have come to believe that this is the true meaning of life, not accumulating wealth or status, but connecting with others, supporting each other, and making the world a better place through small acts of kindness that ripple outward and touch more lives than we will ever know. My life today is not glamorous or extraordinary in the conventional sense. I do not have a fancy job or a huge house or a glamorous lifestyle. But I have something far more valuable. I have peace, I have purpose, and I have the deep, abiding joy of knowing that I am exactly where I am supposed to be, doing exactly what I am supposed to be doing, and living a life that is authentic, meaningful, and true to myself. I have built a home, not just a physical house, but a spiritual home, a sense of belonging that transcends geography and language. A feeling that I am part of something bigger than myself, something beautiful and mysterious and endlessly fascinating. I have learned to embrace the journey, to appreciate the struggles, and to celebrate the victories, no matter how small. Because every single step of the journey has been necessary, every single struggle has been a teacher, and every single victory has been a gift. And so, as I look back on the path that brought me here, from the despair of that parking lot to the joy of this present moment, I am filled with a profound sense of gratitude for everything, the good and the bad, the easy and the hard, the moments of connection and the moments of isolation, because all of it has shaped me into the person I am today, a person who is stronger, wiser, more compassionate, and more resilient than the woman who stood in that parking lot clutching that yellow ticket. I am not the same person I was, and I am grateful for that, because the person I have become is someone I am proud of, someone who can face challenges with courage, who can love with an open heart, who can connect with others across differences, and who can find joy in the simplest of moments. And that, my friend, is the true meaning of a new beginning, not starting over from scratch, but continuing the journey with a new perspective, a new sense of purpose, and a new appreciation for the beauty and wonder of life itself. So if you're listening to this and you're still in the middle of your own struggle, still feeling like giving up, still wondering if things will ever get better, I want you to know that they will, they can, and they do. It may not happen overnight, and it may not happen in the way you expect, but if you keep going, keep believing, and keep putting one foot in front of the other, you will eventually reach a place of peace and belonging that you cannot even imagine right now. And when you get there, you will look back on your struggles with gratitude, because they will have made you who you are. And who you are is someone worth being, someone with a story worth telling, and someone with a future worth living. So hold on, keep going, and never, ever give up on yourself, because you are capable of so much more than you think, and the best is yet to come. And that brings me to the final section of my story, the message I want to leave with you, the words that I hope will stay with you long after this video ends, and the invitation to join me on this beautiful journey of slow, patient, joyful learning. So stay with me, my friend, because we are almost there. The message to you. Now that we have traveled this long, winding, emotional journey together, from that fateful parking ticket and the crushing weight of a new world, through the struggles of love and marriage, the dark night of almost giving up, the miraculous anonymous gift, and the slow, patient rebuilding of everything I thought I had lost, let me leave you with the most important part of this entire story. The message that I have been working toward from the very first word. The gift that I want to pass on to you as you continue your own journey with English, with life, and with the beautiful, terrifying, exhilarating process of becoming who you are meant to be. You see, this story was never really about a parking ticket or even about learning English. It was about something much deeper. Something that connects all of us across every language and culture and border. Something that I hope will resonate with you long after this video ends, and that will give you the strength to keep going, keep trying, and keep believing in yourself, even when everything feels hopeless and you cannot see the light at the end of the tunnel. Here is the truth that I have discovered, and it is so simple that I almost hesitate to say it because it sounds like a cliché. But clichés become clichés for a reason, They are true, they are universal, and they speak to something fundamental in the human experience. The truth is that you are not alone. You have never been alone, and you will never be alone. No matter how isolated and invisible you may feel in any given moment. That anonymous stranger who paid my parking ticket did not know me, did not know my struggles, did not know my language or my culture or my history. But they reached across that vast divide and performed an act of kindness that reminded me that we are all connected, that we are all part of something bigger than ourselves, and that even in the darkest moments, there is goodness, there is light, and there are people who care, people who believe in you, people who want to help you succeed even if they never meet you or receive any recognition for their efforts. That is the miracle of human connection, and it is available to you right now, in this moment, if you are willing to open your heart to it. And here is the second truth, the one that is directly related to your language learning journey. You are capable of so much more than you think you are, and the only thing standing between you and fluency is the belief that you cannot do it, the fear that you are not good enough, the voice in your head that tells you to give up because it is too hard and you will never get there. I spent years believing that voice, years letting it control my actions and limit my potential, and it was only when I started to question that voice, to challenge its assumptions, and to replace it with a kinder, more compassionate inner dialogue that I was finally able to break through the barriers that had been holding me back. Your brain is not your enemy. It is your ally, but it needs you to be patient with it, to give it time to process and grow, to feed it with slow, steady, consistent practice rather than frantic, stressful cramming. When you embrace the slow, when you give yourself permission to make mistakes, when you approach the language with curiosity and joy rather than fear and desperation, you will be amazed at how quickly you progress, how naturally the words start to flow, and how much more confident and capable you feel in every interaction. I also want to tell you that it is okay to have setbacks, it is okay to have bad days, and it is okay to feel frustrated and discouraged, because those feelings are part of the process, and they do not mean that you are failing. They just mean that you are human, and that you are pushing yourself outside your comfort zone, which is the only way to grow. I had countless setbacks along my journey, days when I felt like I was right back at the beginning, days when I made the same mistakes over and over and wanted to scream with frustration, days when I doubted everything I had achieved and wondered if I would ever truly feel at home in this language. But I learned to see those setbacks not as signs of failure, but as signposts, indicators that I was on the right track, that I was challenging myself, that I was growing and evolving even when it did not feel like it. And I learned to be gentle with myself on those days, to give myself the rest and the kindness that I needed to regroup and continue. Because I knew that the journey was not a sprint but a marathon, and that the important thing was not how fast I went but that I kept moving forward. And here is the third truth, the one that ties everything together and gives meaning to all the struggles and triumphs. Your story matters. Your voice matters, and your perspective is valuable and unique, not despite your imperfect English, but because of it. You bring something to the table that no native speaker can bring, a different worldview, a different way of thinking, a different set of experiences and insights that enrich the conversation and make the world a more interesting and diverse place. Do not be ashamed of your accent. Do not apologize for your mistakes. And do not try to erase the parts of yourself that make you who you are. Embrace your identity as a learner, as a traveler between worlds, as a bridge builder who connects cultures and communities with every word you speak. You are not just learning English. You are becoming a global citizen, a person who can navigate multiple cultures and languages. A person who has the courage to step outside your comfort zone and explore the unknown. And that is something to be proud of, something to celebrate. Something that makes you extraordinary in a world that often values conformity over authenticity. I want you to remember the story of that parking ticket, and I want you to think about what it represents in your own life. What is the parking ticket that is holding you back right now? What is the obstacle that seems insurmountable, the challenge that makes you want to give up? The fear that keeps you from reaching your full potential? It might be a language barrier, it might be a cultural difference, it might be a financial struggle, a relationship issue, or a personal insecurity. But whatever it is, I want you to know that it is not permanent, it is not insurmountable, and it does not define you. You have the power to overcome it, just as I overcame mine, and you do not have to do it alone. There are people who believe in you, people who want to help you, people who will show up in unexpected ways to support you on your journey. Just as that anonymous stranger showed up for me. All you have to do is keep going, keep believing, and keep your heart open to the kindness and connection that is all around you, waiting to be discovered. And finally, I want to leave you with a challenge, a simple but powerful challenge that I hope you will take to heart and incorporate into your daily life. I want you to commit to practicing slow English for just 15 minutes every day, 15 minutes of listening to a podcast or video at a slower speed, 15 minutes of reading out loud and savoring each word, 15 minutes of speaking to yourself or a friend in a calm, deliberate manner, 15 minutes of being present and patient with your learning process. It does not sound like much, but I promise you, if you do this consistently, if you make it a habit, you will notice a difference in your confidence, your comprehension, and your overall relationship with the language. And I want you to also commit to being kind to yourself, to treating yourself with the same compassion and patience that you would show a dear friend, to celebrating your progress no matter how small, and to never, ever giving up on the beautiful, capable, worthy person that you are. I also want you to commit to paying it forward, to being that anonymous stranger for someone else, to performing small acts of kindness that ripple outward and touch lives in ways you'll never fully know. It does not have to be big or dramatic. It can be as simple as leaving an encouraging note for someone, paying for a stranger's coffee, or just offering a kind word to someone who is struggling. Because the truth is that we are all in this together, we are all fighting our own battles, and we all need a little help sometimes. And when we give that help freely and without expectation, we create a world that is more compassionate, more connected, and more beautiful for everyone. That is the legacy of the anonymous stranger who paid my parking ticket, and that is the legacy I want to pass on to you, because I believe in you. I believe in your potential, and I believe that you have something unique and valuable to contribute to this world, something that only you can give, and something that will make a difference in ways you cannot even imagine. So as I bring this story to a close, I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for listening, for reading, for being here with me on this journey. It has been an honor to share my story with you, and I hope that something I have said has touched you, inspired you, or given you the courage to keep going on your own journey. Remember that you are not alone, that you are capable, that you are worthy, and that the world is full of kindness and connection waiting to be discovered. And if you ever feel like giving up, just remember that parking ticket, remember that anonymous stranger, and remember that someone somewhere believes in you, even if you have not met them yet. You have a place in this world, you have a voice that deserves to be heard, and you have a story that is worth telling. So keep telling it, keep living it, and keep believing that the best is yet to come, because it is, I promise you, it is. That is all for today. I will make more similar videos in the future. Please subscribe to see them.